The Line in the Dust: How One Woman's Stand Shattered a System by Samuel Johnson. Hello, I'm Samuel Johnsona, Charleston local, who's witnessed this city's highs and lows. Today, I'll lead you through every metal detector beep and each heartbeat on the courthouse's marble steps. You won't just see the surface of it. You'll feel the emotions, the hidden thoughts, and the secrets behind a judge's confident smile. Get ready. This story will pull you into a whirlwind of justice like nothing you've ever experienced. The Encounter. It was one of those late summer afternoons that stretched like warm taffy across rural Missouri, August 17th, 2022 to be precise. The kind of day where the sun hangs suspended in a cloudless sky, pouring thick gold across faded rooftops and parched fields. The air vibrated with heat and the low drone of cicadas, a hypnotic rhythm that made even the most alert minds drift toward daydreams. For the residents of Benton County, it was just another Wednesday. Farmers checked their drought-stricken crops. Waitresses at the Bluebird Diner refilled iced tea glasses with practice swings. Children counted down the final days before school resumed. But for Camila Brooks, it was the end of a grueling 3-day conference in Kansas City and the beginning of something no one could have anticipated. Camila had been driving for hours through farmland and tiny crossroad towns, her black government-issued SUV cutting through stretches of pine forest so quiet she could almost hear her own thoughts ricochet off the windows. At 52, she wore her 26 years of FBI service in the fine lines around her eyes and the permanent furrow between her brows. She wasn't dressed for attention, just faded jeans, a gray lightweight jacket, and dark sunglasses that masked the razor-sharp intelligence behind them. Her body ached from sitting too long. The air conditioning had been fighting a losing battle against the 93-degree heat for the last 100 miles. A headache pulsed behind her left temple. But beneath the physical discomfort lay a bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with the drive. Just another 50 miles, she murmured to herself, checking the fuel gauge that hovered near empty. One stop, then straight home. To anyone passing by, she looked like any middle-aged black woman stopping for gas before the final stretch home. Nothing in her casual demeanor suggested she was the FBI's Midwestern Division Chief, the woman who'd cracked a dozen national cases, brought down drug rings that stretched from Chicago to the Gulf, and stood toe-to-toe with governors and senators in situation rooms across the country. The woman who, despite her rank, still sometimes found herself being the only black person in high-level briefings. The woman who had learned, through painful experience, to keep her FBI credentials tucked away until absolutely necessary. The gas station appeared around a gentle curve, an aging single-story structure with peeling blue paint and a sun-bleached sign that read CJ's Gas Grocery. Two ancient pumps stood sentinel on a cracked concrete island, their digital displays flickering in the afternoon glare. A rusted pickup truck sat in the far corner of the lot, windows half down with the tinny sound of country music drifting outward. Otherwise, the place was deserted. Camila pulled her SUV alongside Pump 2, the tires crunching on scattered gravel. As she stepped out, the heat hit her like a physical force, drawing an involuntary sigh from deep in her chest. Her back muscles protested as she stretched upward, arms extended toward the bleached sky. She popped the gas cap and began filling the tank, her mind already mapping the remainder of her drive home, the shower waiting there, the stack of case files that needed reviewing before tomorrow's 8 a.m. video conference, the leftover Thai food in her refrigerator. The slow crunch of tires on gravel snapped her attention back to the present. A Benton County Sheriff's cruiser rolled into the lot, moving with deliberate slowness. The white vehicle gleamed aggressively in the sunlight, its official seal an eagle clutching arrows catching the light as it turned. The cruiser circled once before, parking at an angle that partially blocked Camila's SUV. Camila didn't look up, didn't react. But every nerve in her body suddenly hummed with alertness. She knew that sound, had heard it in every county from Kansas to Kentucky. The distinctive approach of law enforcement sizing up a situation or a person they found suspicious. The cruiser door opened with a metallic groan. Deputy Kyle Riker unfolded himself from the driver's seat, foot 2, broad-shouldered, with a military-style buzz cut and a chin that jutted forward like an accusation. His khaki uniform was pressed to perfection, the creases sharp enough to draw blood. His boots, however, carried a fine layer of dust that suggested he'd been patrolling back roads all day. What Camila couldn't see, what only I, your narrator, can reveal to you was the toxic brew churning inside Deputy Riker. The 3 reprimands in his personnel file for excessive force, all involving minorities. The bitter divorce finalized last month. The whiskey he'd splashed into his morning coffee. The contempt he harbored for the changing demographics of his county. Riker approached with the strutting confidence of someone who had never faced consequences for crossing lines. "You lost, ma'am?" His voice dragged across the parking lot like gravel being poured from a height. Camila turned slowly, deliberately, keeping her hands visible where they rested on the pump handle. Her FBI training and her lifetime experience as a black woman in America had taught her the choreography of these encounters. "Just getting gas," she replied, her tone friendly but firm. No smile, no frown. Neutral. Riker's gaze traveled from her face to her vehicle, lingering on the government plates. His right hand rested casually on his holstered gun. Not a threat, exactly, but a reminder of its presence. "Let me see your ID. Not a request, a demand." Something cold and ancient slithered through Camila's veins, but her expression remained impassive. She'd faced armed cartel members with less trepidation than she felt during routine traffic stops. Because she knows every black person in America knows that these moments are balanced on knife edges. "May I ask what the issue is, Deputy?" Her voice remained level, professional, reasonable. Riker stepped closer, invading her space with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to making others uncomfortable. "The issue," he said, "is that I don't see license plates from around here, and folks driving shiny black SUVs don't usually stop at this gas station." Camila held his gaze steadily, feeling the weight of every badge she'd ever worn during college, Kansas City PD where she started, the FBI credentials that represented 26 years of breaking barriers. All of it counted for nothing in this moment, on this stretch of rural highway, with this man. She reached slowly, telegraphing each movement into her jacket pocket and pulled out her driver's license. "Not her badge, not yet. Here you go." Riker snatched it from her fingers as if the document itself offended him. His eyes narrowed as he read aloud, "Camila Brooks." The way her name rolled off his tongue made it sound like something illicit, something that didn't belong in his mouth. "What are you really doing in Benton County?" And there it was, the real question beneath the question. "What are you doing here? In this white space? In my territory?" Camila felt the familiar spark of indignation, quickly suppressed. This man knew nothing about her, not that she'd grown up just 2 counties over, the daughter of a mail carrier and a high school math teacher. Not that she'd earned her place at every step, fighting through the double barriers of racism and sexism. Not that she'd survived an ambush in Juarez that left 2 agents dead. Not that she commanded a division of 200 federal agents. "Like I said," Camila replied evenly, "getting gas." "Is there something else you need, Deputy Riker?" She noted his nameplate deliberately, a subtle reminder that identities work both ways. That was the moment, the line drawn in the dust between them. You could feel the tension crystallize in the shimmering air, thick and buzzing with potential energy. Riker's face hardened, jaw muscles bunching beneath stubbled skin. His chest expanded as he stepped even closer, badge nearly touching her collarbone. "You got an attitude, Miss Brooks. I don't like that." And just like that, without warning, without provocation, he shoved her hard, his right hand connecting with her shoulder and sending her stumbling backward against the SUV. "Hey!" Camila's voice cracked with genuine surprise. "That is not necessary." But Riker was already moving past her, leaning through the open passenger door of her vehicle, rifling through the glove box with entitled efficiency. Registration papers, napkins, a half-eaten protein bar all scattered across the seat as if her privacy meant nothing. As if she meant nothing. Camila's pulse hammered in her throat, but she didn't move. Years in the field had taught her one rule above all others: survive first, respond later. "My registration is in there," she said, trying to diffuse the situation. "Top folder." Riker found the document, crumpled it in one meaty fist, and turned on her with eyes narrowed to slits. Something dark passed across his face, not just anger, but a deeper, uglier emotion. What happened next unfolded in a horrifying slow motion. Riker raised his right boot standard-issue law enforcement, thick-soled and heavy, and before Camila could react, before she could even process what was happening, he kicked her, hard, directly in the shin. The crack echoed across the empty lot like a gunshot. Camila's leg buckled instantly. White-hot pain exploded upward from her shin as she collapsed with a strangled gasp. The rough gravel tore through her jeans, embedding itself in her palms and knees as she hit the ground. The gas pump nozzle clattered beside her, still dripping fuel. Riker loomed over her, his silhouette blotting out the sun. The corners of his mouth twitched upward in what couldn't properly be called a smile more, the satisfied look of someone who had just demonstrated an important truth. "That's where you belong," he said, voice low and venomous. "Stay down." Then he turned away, as if the encounter was concluded, as if what had just happened was nothing more notable than checking a license. But here's the part that electrifies this story, that transforms it from yet another incident of brutality to something altogether different. Camila Brooks didn't stay down. Gritting her teeth against the molten pain in her shin, she pressed one palm into the gravel and forced herself upright. Slowly, deliberately, her knee throbbed in protest. Blood seeped through the tear in her jeans where skin had been shredded on impact. But her face remained composed of a mask of dignity that revealed nothing of the agony radiating through her leg. Across the lot, a teenage boy who had been stacking soft drink crates outside the gas station's entrance stood frozen. His wiry frame was rigid with tension, his eyes wide with witness. In his trembling hand, a phone tilted slightly upward, recording everything. The lens caught the sunlight briefly as he adjusted his angle. Riker either didn't notice the teenager or didn't care. He climbed back into his cruiser with the unhurried movements of a man who feared no consequences, slammed the door, and revved the engine in a final act of dominance. The tires spun on the gravel as he peeled out of the lot, dust spiraling behind him like a signature. Camila stood alone in the settling dust, her breath coming in controlled, shallow pulses. Her heart hammered against her ribs with such force she could feel it in her fingertips. Her driver's license lay face down in the dirt where Riker had dropped it. She bent wincing as weight shifted onto her injured leg to retrieve the ID, brushing away grit with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly. 26 years of maintaining control in the most harrowing situations, and she could still feel the adrenaline surging through her system like wildfire. Then her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. One glance at the screen changed everything. The caller ID read, Olson, Director Ops Secure Camila, answered with the practiced calm that had made her legendary among field agents. "This is Brooks. Cam." The voice on the other end was sharp with concern. "Are you all right? We've got a flag." Body cam footage just popped a geofence alert. Something happened in Benton, of course. All FBI division chiefs had geofence alerts programmed into the system. Any law enforcement body cam activation within proximity to their location triggered immediate notifications to headquarters. Camila didn't hesitate. "Deputy assaulted me, kicked me." It's on a civilian's phone, too. Her mind was already racing ahead, shifting from victim to investigator with practiced efficiency. "I want Riker's full file complaints, disciplinary record, partner list, now." There was a brief pause, then a quiet. On it. She ended the call and returned the phone to her pocket, her gaze drifting across the gas station lot. The teenage boy still stood there, phone now held openly in his hands, its camera still trained on her. Their eyes met across the distance as uncertain, hers steady with newfound purpose. A small, grim smile touched her lips. Not amusement, but the cool determination of someone who had just identified their battlefield. "Send that footage to the news," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. "To everyone!" The boy nodded, understanding the weight of what he'd witnessed and what he now held. Camila returned to her SUV, each step a testament to willpower over pain. Her hands were scraped raw, her knees screaming in protest, and heat still shimmered in waves off the pavement. But inside her, something had ignited a controlled burn of purpose. Because Kyle Riker had made a catastrophic error in judgment. He thought he'd just roughed up some random black woman passing through his territory. What he didn't know, what he never saw coming, was that he'd assaulted the FBI chief of the Midwestern Division. And she was about to bring the full weight of federal justice down on his head. 2. The machine awakes 3 minutes. That's all it took. Just 3 minutes between Riker's boot connecting with Camila's shin and the machinery of federal investigation grinding into motion. Camila didn't drive away immediately. She stood beside her vehicle, one hand braced against the door for support, the other gently probing the throbbing area where the deputy's boot had struck. The pain radiated outward in hot pulses, but it was the humiliation that cut deeper. She wasn't new to hatred. Growing up black in rural America had taught her its contours before she had words to name it. Rising through law enforcement ranks had exposed her to its institutional forms. She'd survived it, worked through it, outlasted it. But there was something different about this encounter, something in the casual cruelty of it all. The way Riker had kicked her like she wasn't a person at all, just an obstacle to be removed from his path. That's what stayed with her as she stood in the shimmering heat, cataloging details with the precision of someone trained to notice everything. The teenage witness approached her slowly, moving with the caution of someone approaching an injured animal. He was thin, maybe 16, with wide eyes and dark hair falling across his forehead. His white t-shirt was stained with sweat and soda syrup from his shift stocking coolers. His hands still trembled slightly as he held the phone toward her like an offering. "I got the whole thing," he said, voice cracking with tension. "I didn't know what else to do." Camila studied him for a moment and took in the Star Wars keychain dangling from his belt loop, the scuffed sneakers, the mix of fear and determination in his eyes. She recognized something in him, the instinct to document injustice, to bear witness when everything inside you screams to look away. She gave him a nod that conveyed more than words could articulate. "You did good," she told him, her voice steady despite the pain radiating up her leg. "Make sure it goes everywhere." Then she slid behind the wheel of her SUV, the leather seat warm against her back. Her mind had already shifted gears from victim to commander, from target to hunter. This wasn't personal anymore, it was professional. And that made it infinitely more dangerous for Kyle Riker. She pulled her government-issued phone from her pocket and found the secure contact she rarely used unless situations escalated beyond standard protocols. Marcus Ellington, Deputy Director of Intelligence Coordination. Her thumb hesitated over the name for just a fraction of a second. Calling him meant this would become an official matter, with all the paperwork, scrutiny, and political complications that entailed. But the ache in her leg made the decision clear. The call connected on the second ring. "Cam," he answered, voice already tight with concern. "We got pings from Benton County. You okay?" "Not even close," she replied, the steel in her voice unmistakable. "Pull everything on a Deputy Kyle Riker, Benton County Sheriff's Department. I want every complaint, every incident swept under the rug. Civilian recordings just went online." "This one's going to burn. Copy that," Marcus responded without hesitation. Then, more cautiously, "What happened?" "He kicked me," she said simply, "in broad daylight at a gas station. Thought I was just some black woman passing through. There was silence on the line for a beat." Then Marcus responded, his voice low and controlled. "He's done." Camila ended the call without further comment. No need for more. 20 years of friendship and professional collaboration meant Marcus understood exactly what those two syllables signified. Outside the SUV, the teenage witness was already uploading the video, thumbs flying across his screen with the dexterity of his generation. The footage would be bouncing across the internet within minutes. Her face, Riker's boot, that smug expression so certain of impunity it would all be out there for the world to see. And by the time it hit Twitter, it wouldn't matter who she was professionally. But soon they'd know. She reached down to massage her knee, wincing at the contact. Then, almost as an afterthought, she unzipped the small side compartment of her bag. Inside gleamed her FBI credentials, the shield and ID that identified her as Chief, Midwestern Division. She hadn't displayed it earlier not because she was hiding her identity, but because she wanted to see precisely how far Riker would go without the deterrent of federal authority. How deep his prejudice would carry him, now she knew. The gas pump beeped, signaling a full tank. She replaced the nozzle, secured the gas cap, and paused to survey the scene once more. A breeze stirred through the lot, carrying the mingled scents of gasoline, dust, and the faint sweetness of nearby cornfields. In the distance, a siren wailed faint but growing louder. Not for her. Not yet. But soon they'd come looking. Not because she'd summoned them, but because the internet would demand it. She pulled onto the highway with deliberate care, the SUV rolling smoothly over the transition from gravel to asphalt. The ache in her leg intensified as she pressed the accelerator, but she welcomed the pain now. It grounded her, kept her focused on what needed to happen next. 20 miles down the road, she pulled into the parking lot of a roadside diner's weathered building with peeling red paint and a buzzing neon sign that struggled to spell out May's home cooking. She needed a moment not to rest, but to plan. Inside, buzzing fluorescent lights cast a sickly glow over worn booths and linoleum floors that had seen better decades. A waitress behind the counter, gray-streaked hair piled haphazardly atop her head, name tag reading Dolores gave Camila an appraising glance. Her eyes caught the limp, noted the dirt on Camila's jeans, the tight lines around her mouth that spoke of pain carefully managed. "Rough day?" she asked, the sympathy in her voice genuine. Camila didn't want pity. She wanted coffee and 10 minutes of tactical silence. "Something like that," she replied, sliding into a booth at the far end of the empty diner. Back to the wall, eyes on the entrance, old habits. Dolores brought over a chipped mug of coffee strong enough to strip paint and a slice of apple pie without being asked. "On the house," she said, with the quiet dignity of someone who recognized suffering and knew the small comforts that might ease it. When the waitress retreated, Camila pulled out her phone again. This time, she wasn't calling for help or information. She was initiating an investigation. She opened a secure application and began typing, "Case initiation, Deputy Kyle Riker, Benton County Sheriff's Department. Violations, civil rights, assault on a federal officer, excessive force, under color of law." She hit save and watched the encryption protocols activate, securing the file within the FBI system. That was the first nail in Riker's coffin. He just didn't know it yet. While she waited for her coffee to cool, Camila opened a browser window and typed Benton County Sheriff's Department history. The results painted a predictable picture. A department that had changed little since the 1970s, predominantly white in a county whose demographics had shifted significantly over the past decade. Multiple civil suits settled quietly, most details restricted by non-disclosure agreements. The pattern was as familiar as breathing to her. Isolated incidents treated as anomalies rather than symptoms of systemic poison. By the time Camila finished her pie and drained her second cup of coffee, the video was already lighting up the internet like a brush fire. What started as a few retweets from local teenagers who knew the boy who'd recorded it quickly exploded into a viral phenomenon. First, a repost on a Missouri community page with the caption, "Is this what our tax dollars pay for?" Then an activist account with 500,000 followers shared it. "This is why we say Black Lives Matter. Watch what this cop does to an unarmed black woman at a gas station." Within an hour, it had spread across every platform: TikTok, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, with viewers dissecting every frame like digital forensic analysts. That boot slamming into her shin. Her control fell onto the gravel. Riker's contemptuous parting words, "That's where you belong." The captions multiplied. "This is America. She's somebody. Just wait. Find this officer now." The world didn't know who she was yet, but they recognized what they were witnessing and they were furious. When Camila stepped outside the diner, her phone was vibrating nonstop with incoming messages. Marcus had texted, "You're viral. Video's got 1M hits already. Riker's name is trending. Got your file on him. Do you want the highlights or the full dirt?" She typed back one word, "Both." He called her 2 minutes later, his voice pitched low as if concerned about being overheard despite being in a secure office. 6 years on the force, Marcus began without preamble. Riker's got 4 excessive force complaints in his jacket, all closed without disciplinary action. 3 involved black men under 30. The 4th was a Latina nurse he pulled over for a busted taillight. Tried to arrest her for resisting when she questioned why he needed her to step out of the vehicle. That one almost went to a civilian review board until the complainant suddenly withdrew. Camila's jaw tensed imperceptibly. A familiar story. The predictable pattern. And get this, Marcus continued, the rustle of papers audible as he flipped through documents. The sheriff's department backed him every single time. Sheriff Linda Calkins selected 3 consecutive terms running unopposed, with the county commission never once filed a disciplinary report that stuck. Always insufficient evidence or procedure followed as trained. Camila didn't speak for a long moment. She simply stared out at the empty road stretching before her, the diner's neon sign flickering erratically behind her like a visual representation of her thoughts' illumination interrupted by darkness. "They'll try to bury it," she said finally, certainty in every syllable. Marcus didn't argue, but it's too late. Video's out, story's hot. News vans are probably halfway to Benton already. Camila nodded to herself. Then let's make sure they don't get the chance. She ended the call and climbed back into her SUV, her limp now more pronounced. Her knee had stiffened during her brief respite, sending sharp protests up her leg with each step. But she didn't slow her pace or alter her trajectory. She was already plotting her next 3 moves. That's how she'd survive this long in a system that wasn't built for people who looked like her. Stay calm, stay sharp, stay 5 moves ahead of the chaos. By the time she merged back onto the highway, her inbox was flooded with messages. Journalists seeking comment. Civil rights activists offering support. Former field agents she hadn't spoken to in years checked if the woman in the video was really their former colleague. She ignored them all for now. Instead, she sent an encrypted message directly to the Bureau's legal division. Need internal file access on Sheriff Linda Calkins. All deputies assigned to her unit. Last 10 years of complaints, resolved or unresolved. 10 minutes later, a reply arrived. Working on it. Director wants to be briefed. He's not happy. Camila allowed herself a grim smile. The director's displeasure could mean many things. Frustration about a potential PR crisis, concern about one of his division chiefs being assaulted, or irritation that this would force a confrontation with local law enforcement that might have political repercussions. She didn't particularly care which it was. The machine was now in motion. The sun had dipped below the tree line, coating the highway in long shadows. Her SUV's headlights cut through the gathering darkness, capturing dust particles that swirled in the beams like miniature galaxies. She switched on the radio. Every station was already buzzing with the story. A video circulating online shows what appears to be a sheriff's deputy physically assaulting a black woman at a gas station in Benton County. Civil rights attorneys are calling for an immediate investigation. The woman has not yet been identified, but sources suggest she may have federal law enforcement ties. Camila turned the volume down. She knew what would come next. The emergency press conferences, the carefully crafted statements expressing deep concern and promising thorough investigations. The performative outrage from officials who'd spent years ignoring similar behavior. They'd pretend to be shocked. They always did. But Camila hadn't come this far to accept shock as a substitute for accountability. She pulled into a small roadside motel just past the county line, the kind of place that had seen its best days during the Nixon administration. She checked in under an alias, paid cash, and requested a room facing the parking lot. Old habits from years of field work. She didn't need eyes on her tonight, not until she had all her pieces in position. The room was sparse but adequate. A twin bed with a faded floral comforter, a dusty lamp with a crooked shade, and a television that probably hadn't been updated since the Clinton years. But it had Wi-Fi and a lock that worked, which were the only amenities that mattered right now. She set her laptop on the wobbly table by the window and opened the folder Marcus had sent. Riker's complete service record. Photos from his academy graduation showing a younger face already set in lines of determined self-importance. Scanned complaints with witness statements that were never followed up. Civilian reports describing him as aggressive, unnecessarily confrontational, or more bluntly, power-tripping. One woman had even written a letter to the editor 3 years earlier describing an encounter where Riker had made her 17-year-old son lie face down on wet pavement during a routine traffic stop, gun drawn the entire time. The newspaper had never published it. And here they were, 3 years later. Different victims, same perpetrator, identical lack of accountability. Camila created a new document titled Benton County Pattern of Misconduct, Preliminary Findings. She began typing methodically, her knee elevated on a rolled towel from the bathroom, her phone occasionally buzzing with updates that she glanced at but didn't immediately respond to. Every word she typed was another brick in the wall she was constructing not just around Riker, but around the entire rotten foundation that had supported him for years. Because that kick hadn't just been an assault. It was a window into something more pervasive, more insidious. And now Camila planned to shatter the entire frame. 3. The pattern emerges Camila didn't truly sleep that night. She might have closed her eyes for 20 minutes here or there, but her mind never fully disengaged from the case taking shape before her. Each time she drifted toward unconsciousness, she would snap back to alertness, another connection forming in her thoughts. Because this wasn't just about Deputy Riker anymore, it never had been. That man was simply the visible symptom of something deeper, meaner, more institutionally entrenched. Around 4:15 a.m. She poured herself a cup of motel coffee, a scorched, bitter brew that tastes like pennies and regret, and opened a second file Marcus had just uploaded. Sheriff Linda Calkins, 47 years old, former state trooper. Elected sheriff at 39 after her predecessor retired midterm. Won 3 subsequent elections unopposed. Married to a local construction company owner who frequently secured county contracts. And just like Riker, her professional record was suspiciously unblemished, too perfect, too clean, too deliberate in its absence of missteps. Camila leaned closer to her screen, parsing the information between the lines. Calkins had personally signed off on every one of Riker's misconduct dismissals. But more tellingly, her signature appeared on dismissal forms for at least 11 other officers under her command with similar complaints: excessive force, racial profiling, illegal search and seizure, verbal abuse, physical intimidation. Most of the complaints were dismissed within 10 business days. Not a single one had resulted in formal discipline. Not one. That wasn't just a pattern. It was a system deliberate, organized, and efficient in its protection of certain behaviors while punishing others. Camila opened another browser tab and began cross-referencing cases by date and outcome. Each time someone filed a complaint against a Benton County deputy, the same names appeared in the investigation process. One internal affairs officer who consistently found no violations of procedure. A county clerk who routinely misplaced body camera footage requests, and a local judge who had dismissed 3 civil suits on jurisdictional technicalities. All of them, Camila noted, had direct professional or personal connections to Sheriff Calkins' office. It wasn't just broken, it was rigged. She sat back and exhaled heavily, feeling the pressure building in her chest. Not from pain, though her legs still throbbed beneath the makeshift ice pack she'd fashioned from a plastic bag and the motel ice machine. No, this pressure came from clarity, the kind that arrives when you finally see not just individual puzzle pieces, but the comprehensive image they form. The problem wasn't a single officer. It was the soil he grew in. Outside the thin curtains, the sky was shifting from black to charcoal gray. Another day beginning, but this one would be fundamentally different from the one before. Camila dressed methodically. Fresh jeans, a black shirt beneath her jacket, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. She clipped her FBI badge to the inside of her waistband, out of sight for now, but readily accessible. Then she made the call that would accelerate everything. Marcus answered immediately, his voice alert despite the early hour. "You're up early." "I'm pissed," she replied flatly. "And I've got a job for you. Hit me. I need you to find out who's funding Calkins' re-election. PACs, real estate connections, out of county donations. I want the whole tree, not just the branches. I'm on it." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "And, Marcus, yeah? I want to know if Calkins is just dirty or if she's the architect." That landed heavily on the line. The distinction was crucial. Was the sheriff merely a corrupt officer enabling misconduct? Or was she the designer of a system deliberately constructed to perpetuate injustice? Marcus understood immediately. Consider it done. Camila checked out of the motel by 6 a.m. The manager barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as she slid the key across the counter. That was fine. She didn't need attention. Not yet. The first news van she passed was parked outside the gas station where Riker had assaulted her less than 24 hours earlier. A reporter in a crisp blue blazer stood beside Pump 2, microphone in hand, speaking earnestly into the morning sun about disturbing footage and calls for accountability. The clip would air on every local station by 7 a.m. and national networks by noon. Camila drove past without slowing down. At 7:30 a.m., she pulled into the parking lot of the FBI field office outside Jefferson City. She entered without fanfare, just the badge flash, firm eye contact, and the kind of purposeful stride that discouraged questions. The office was already buzzing with activity, though few agents made direct eye contact with her. Word had spread about the video. and the tension in the air was palpable. She claimed an unused conference room in the back corner and set up her laptop. Within the hour, Marcus delivered a comprehensive financial analysis, campaign finance records, donation logs, internal memos. The picture it painted was as predictable as it was disheartening. Sheriff Culkin's political operation was being bankrolled by a network of local business interests. 2 construction firms, one owned by her husband, a third-party security company that supplied equipment to the department, and a retired judge who now chaired a community relations board that hadn't released a public report in 5 years. All of them had benefited from contracts awarded through the sheriff's office construction deals, surveillance equipment upgrades, even food service arrangements for the county jail. Every connection aligned perfectly, a closed circuit of money and influence. Camila stared at the names, memorizing each one. Then she opened a new document. This one wasn't for the FBI, it wasn't for the press, it was for her personal use only. She titled it simply, Network. And then she began to build it. Riker at the bottom, Calkins above him, the internal affairs officer, the judge, the county clerk, the Donnersa complete web of enablers and beneficiaries. Each name she added crystallized her understanding of what she was facing. It wasn't revenge driving her. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was duty, pure and simple. This wasn't going to be a headline that faded in a week. This was going to be a reckoning just after 3 p.m. Camila stepped outside for the first time in hours. She needed fresh air and a moment of clarity. The sky was an uncompromising blue, the August heat still oppressive despite the late afternoon hour. She sat on the concrete steps outside the field office, scrolling through her phone. The notifications had become a deluge. Civil rights lawyers offering representation, a senator's aide requesting a statement, national news anchors seeking exclusive interviews. She ignored them all. She wasn't ready to speak publicly. She was still gathering her evidence, still connecting the dots. Back inside, she made one more call, this time to Denise Hampton, a federal prosecutor she'd worked with years earlier on a corruption case in Kansas City. They'd formed a bond built on shared principles and mutual respect during that investigation. Denise answered with a weary hello that suggested she'd been fielding calls nonstop. "It's Brooks," Camila said simply. Denise's voice immediately sharpened with attention. "Oh, I saw the video. Didn't know it was you until this morning when the office was buzzing with it. You all right?" "No," Camila replied honestly, "but I will be. Listen, I'm putting together a network and I need your help when it's ready." There was a beat of silence as Denise processed the implications. Then she answered with quiet determination, "You name it." Camila ended the call feeling the first genuine sense of progress. The walls were closing in around Riker, around Calkins, around all of them, and she was just getting started. IV. The confrontation. By the time Camila walked into Benton County's courthouse the following morning, the world had caught up to her investigation. Her identity had been confirmed by multiple news outlets. The video had gone national, playing on constant rotation across every major network. That single moment of violence Riker's boot raised, then slammed into her leg, her controlled fall, his contemptuous smirk as he walked away, had become seared into America's consciousness. The visual shorthand for a much larger conversation about power, race, and accountability. But now the world would see the next chapter unfold. Camila hadn't arrived with an entourage. No lawyers, no security detail, just her solitary figure moving with determined grace through the morning crowds. She wore her authority like Armora, perfectly tailored Navy suit, her FBI badge now prominently displayed on her belt, her expression a careful blend of professional composure and unmistakable resolve. Her knees still protested with each step, but she refused to limp today. Not here. Not when every eye was watching her, assessing her strength or searching for weakness. The courthouse steps were packed with humanity. Journalists jostled for position, their cameras raised like weapons. Local residents stood in clusters, some holding hastily made signs. Justice for Camila, Fire Riker, Accountability Now. Activists with megaphones led chants that rose and fell like waves against the imposing stone facade. A makeshift podium had been placed at the top of the steps, ringed by microphones from every major outlet. Behind it, the American flag hung limply in the still air, as if even it was waiting to see what would happen next. Camila paused at the foot of the steps, surveying the scene. Then, with deliberate pacing, she ascended one step at a time, feeling hundreds of eyes tracking her movement. The crowd noise diminished as she approached the podium, a hush spreading outward like ripples in still water. She didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, she looked out across the sea of faces of journalists she recognized from national broadcasts, local residents whose expressions ranged from supportive to skeptical, young activists with fire in their eyes. "My name is Camila Brooks," she began, her voice steady and clear, carrying across the courthouse steps without shouting. "I am the FBI chief for the Midwestern Division. I have served this country for 26 years. I have worked alongside federal agents, local police, and international task forces. I have taken down drug cartels, dismantled trafficking rings, and exposed corruption in courtrooms and state houses." She paused, not for dramatic effect, but to allow the weight of her credentials to settle across the crowd. "Yesterday," she continued, "I was assaulted in broad daylight on American soil by a uniformed officer who didn't ask questions, didn't check facts, and didn't care who I was, only what I looked like." A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd, camera shutters clicking like mechanical insects. "I didn't tell him who I was because I wanted to see how far he would go, and he went all the way. He shoved me. He kicked me to the ground. And then he walked away like it was nothing." Camila's voice remained level, but her eyes burned with an intensity that the cameras captured perfectly. "I'm not here today just to talk about one man," she said, shifting the focus to her larger purpose. "I'm here to talk about the system that trained him to believe that was acceptable. The system that protected him after 4 previous complaints of excessive force. The system that allowed his supervisor to dismiss those complaints without consequence." She leaned slightly forward, her hands gripping the edges of the podium. "That's not law enforcement. That's complicity." A reporter from CNN leaned forward eagerly. Someone from the crowd shouted, "Tell it." Camila acknowledged them with a slight nod. "I have filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice," she announced, her voice gaining power. "I've submitted evidence of a pattern of civil rights violations inside the Benton County Sheriff's Office. And I've initiated a federal probe into Sheriff Linda Cockinsha's leadership, her contracts, her finances, and her command decisions." Gasps rippled through the press corps. Cockin's name hasn't been officially connected to the investigation until this moment. The sheriff herself was conspicuously absent from the courthouse, having issued only a brief written statement the previous evening expressing concern and promising an internal review. Camila continued without pause. "We're not looking at a bad apple. We're looking at a spoiled orchard." The crowd erupted with cheers, shouts, applause thundering across the courthouse steps. Camila waited, allowing the reaction to crest and begin to recede before she spoke again. "This is not just about me," she said, her voice softening just enough to draw everyone closer. "This is about every person who got stopped because they looked out of place, every kid who was searched for wearing the wrong hoodie, every mother who filed a complaint that mysteriously vanished, every man who got roughed up and then told to be grateful it wasn't worse." She scanned the crowd, finding faces she didn't know yet felt connected to through shared experience. "This isn't about politics," she said firmly. "It's about justice. It's about truth. It's about fixing what we've allowed to rot for far too long." Then, her voice dropping slightly, she delivered her final message. "I didn't ask for this spotlight. I didn't expect this fight. But I'm not backing down from it." The applause came again, louder this time, sustained by genuine emotion rather than mere reaction. Behind the cameras, a man in a Benton County Sheriff's Department uniform stood rigid, watching. Camila noticed him, made brief eye contact, held at a heartbeat longer than casual observation warranted, a message without words. Then she stepped back from the podium. A dozen reporters shouted questions simultaneously. "Chief Brooks, is it true you've received threats? Is Deputy Riker still on active duty? Do you believe Sheriff Calkins should resign?" She didn't answer any of them. She turned and walked back down the steps, her shoulders squared, her stride purposeful. The crowd parted around her like a sea before Moses. Marcus waited for her beside a Bureau SUV at the curb. He handed her a bottle of water and said with quiet admiration, "That was one hell of a speech." Camila exhaled slowly, allowing herself a brief tight smile. "Now they know." "Yeah," he replied. "But so does Calkins. I'm counting on it." He opened the passenger door for her, but she paused before getting in, looking back at the courthouse, the ornate columns, the carved stone facade, the democratic ideals it was supposed to represent. "This isn't just a spark anymore," she said thoughtfully. "It's a fuse." She climbed into the vehicle, and as Marcus pulled away from the curb, neither of them noticed the unmarked car that eased into traffic 3 vehicles behind them. The system was already planning its counterattack. They didn't wait long to strike back. That night, just after 10 p.m., Camila was finishing a call with her DOJ contact in Washington when the motel lights outside her window flickered ominously. A sound like footsteps crunched against the gravel parking lot. She paused mid-sentence, her senses sharpening with predatory focus. The call ended, and the silence that followed felt too deliberate, too complete. She moved to the window with practiced caution, easing the cheap plastic blinds apart just enough to see outside. What she saw made her blood run cold. Her government-issued SUV was on fire. Orange flames licked upward from beneath the hood, consuming the engine block with frightening speed. Black smoke billowed into the night sky, carrying the acrid scent of burning plastic and fuel. She grabbed her phone, dialed Marcus, and rushed outside barefoot, the heat already radiating across the asphalt lot in palpable waves. By the time she reached the vehicle, the fire had engulfed the front half entirely. Even from 10 feet away, the heat seared her skin and stung her eyes. The crackling flames roared like a living thing, hungry and malevolent. This was no accident. Someone had thrown a Molotov cocktail, the shattered remnants of a glass bottle still visible in the burning wreckage, the gasoline accelerant explaining the intensity of the blaze. And there, just beyond the burning vehicle, she spotted Ida's scrap of cardboard wedged under the windshield wiper of a nearby parked car. 3 words scrawled in thick black marker, "Stay in your lane." She didn't need to speculate about the source. This was a warning, plain and simple. But Camila Brooks had never been one to heed warnings based on intimidation. Marcus arrived 5 minutes later, tires screeching as he pulled into the lot. He leapt from his vehicle with a fire extinguisher already in hand, spraying the chemical foam across the flames until they hissed and died, leaving behind the skeletal remains of what had been her transportation. Panting from exertion, he turned to Camila. "They're scared." She nodded once, her expression unnervingly calm despite the destruction before her. Good. The next morning, Camila filed a federal intimidation complaint, methodical, thorough, and emotional only in its precision. That same day, body camera footage from Riker's cruiser finally surfaced, released anonymously by what appeared to be a whistleblower inside the sheriff's office. The new footage confirmed everything the cell phone video had shown, but with additional damning audio, Riker's voice mocking her as she struggled to stand. Using racial slurs when he thought no one could hear, laughing to himself as he drove away. There was no spinning this, no explaining it away as a misunderstanding or a procedure followed incorrectly. Still, Sheriff Calkins tried. She issued a statement through the department's Facebook page, carefully worded press release about deep concern and awaiting complete investigation results. She didn't mention Camila by name, didn't reference Riker directly, just vague platitudes and bureaucratic deflection. Camila didn't bother responding. She didn't need to. By noon, spontaneous protests had erupted across 3 Missouri cities: Columbia, Jefferson City, and Springfield. People were done waiting for official channels. They marched with signs bearing Camila's name, demanded resignations, called for indictments. The pressure was building. But so was the resistance. That evening, Marcus called with ominous news. "They're digging, Cam, deep. Word is someone in D.C. leaked that you're under internal review. For what?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Alleged breach of protocol. Anonymous tipster claims you incited the protests intentionally, that you weaponized your position for personal revenge." Camila laughed once, cold and humorless. "Let me guess, the same anonymous tip that suggested I staged the entire video? Probably. Let them try." But later that night, the counterattack escalated beyond what either of them had anticipated. A secure message arrived in her bureau email. Notification of temporary suspension, effective immediately. No badge, no access, no authority until the Office of Professional Responsibility completed its expedited review. Camila stared at the screen in stunned silence. They pulled her credentials without so much as a hearing, a virtually unprecedented move for an agent of her rank without criminal allegations. She stood from the desk, walked to the bathroom, and studied her reflection in the spotted mirror. Her face appeared unchanged, but inside she felt a knot forming in her chest. Not defeat, not even anger, resolve. They wanted her silent, so now she'd get louder. She called Marcus immediately. Time to go public. You sure? Yes. Full release, body cam footage, emails, the pattern documentation. Leak it all. And they did. That night, a trusted journalist at a national outlet published the entire package's front-page exposé detailing everything Camila had uncovered about Benton County, the pattern of complaints, the financial connections, the systematic suppression of accountability. They didn't use her name in the byline, but everyone in law enforcement knew it was her evidence, her voice narrating the rot, her expertise exposing the connections. The response was nuclear. Senators issued statements demanding federal oversight. Civil rights organizations called for mass resignations. The hashtag #JusticeCamila trends for 48 consecutive hours. And while Camila herself was officially sidelined, her message had reached further than any badge could have taken it. But the opposition wasn't finished. 2 nights later, Camila returned to her motel room after a strategy call to find the door kicked in, the frame splintered. Inside, chaos reigned, drawers emptied onto the floor, the mattress slashed open, her laptop smashed beyond repair. Her duffel bag had been gutted, files torn into confetti. An old photo of her nephew had been ripped in half and left prominently on the bed. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was personnel, a message that nowhere was safe, nothing was sacred. She called Marcus, her voice razor sharp despite the violation surrounding her. "They're trying to erase me. They won't." "No," she agreed, surveying the destruction with cold calculation, "because I'm going to erase them first." She swept the room methodically for surveillance devices, secured what remained of her personal items, and relocated to a new position, this time a small rental cabin hidden behind a bait shop off a county road that didn't appear on most GPS systems. She stayed up through the night rebuilding her case, not just against Riker, but against every component of the system that had enabled him. And when morning came, she didn't feel exhausted. She felt ready. The counterattack. Camila didn't run. She didn't hide, and she certainly didn't break. By the time dawn painted the Missouri sky in muted pinks and golds, she had already showered, changed clothes, and established her new command center in the cabin's small living room. A card table served as her desk. Her backup laptop, always kept in a separate location, hummed quietly, and 3 burner phones were arranged in a neat row, each designated for different contacts. No one knew she was there except Marcus. And that's exactly how she wanted it. She needed privacy to plan her next move because it was time to stop reacting defensively. Time to flip the game entirely. They'd kicked in her door, burned her vehicle, smeared her reputation, and suspended her badge. They'd come at her with fire, intimidation, and bureaucracy. Now she would hit back with something far more powerful: irrefutable facts. The whistleblower who had leaked the body camera footage had also provided something else, a copy of an internal memo buried deep within the Benton County Sheriff's Department server. It was dated 6 months earlier and written by a sergeant who had since been reassigned to a position 3 states away. The memo read, "Deputy Riker recommended for temporary leave pending review of escalating use of force patterns. Sheriff Calkins overruled." No follow-up initiated. There it was in official documentation. They knew he was dangerous, and they deliberately kept him on patrol anyway. Camila forwarded the memo to Denise Hampton, the federal prosecutor she trusted most. Then she called Marcus to set their trap. "Ready?" she asked. "Always." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Create a controlled leak-fake intelligence drop through burner accounts and encrypted forums suggesting Camila would be meeting with a DOJ special investigator at a specific location. I 2 set for Vorse Claes and Enden 12 the 16 Vetteri and Orchete. Vorse plan was elegant in its simplicity. Create a controlled leak-fake intelligence drop through burner accounts and encrypted, bringing damning documentation that would implicate the entire Sheriff's Department leadership. The rumor would reach Calkins' crew within hours. That much was certain. Their paranoia would ensure it. "They'll bite," Marcus predicted. "They're desperate and making mistakes. Exactly, Camila agreed. We let them come to us this time. By noon, the trap was baited and set. The location: an abandoned courthouse in a satellite town west of Benton County, 3-story brick building with broken windows and rusted metal doors, unused for years but still standing as a monument to faded authority. The bait: a laptop bag filled with dummy files and blank drives, realistic enough to tempt but useless if seized. Camila positioned herself on the 3rd floor, seated calmly near a broken window with a clear view of the approaching road. Marcus stationed himself in a parked truck across the street, binoculars trained on the building's entrances. They didn't have to wait long. At 4:37 p.m., the first vehicle appeared, a black SUV with covered license plates, followed by another identical vehicle moments later. 3 men emerged, 2 in plain clothes and 1 with the unmistakable posture of law enforcement even in civilian attire. A radio was clipped to his belt. Sheriff's deputies, off-duty and unauthorized. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't knock. They simply kicked in the side door with practiced efficiency. Camila didn't move. She simply activated the recording devices she and Marcus had planted throughout the building earlier that day. The cameras captured everything. The men searching rooms with guns drawn, rifling through the decoy bag with increasing frustration. Their faces contorting with anger when they realized the documents weren't what they'd expected. Then one of them spotted Camila standing at the end of the hallway, watching them with unsettling calm. "Looking for something?" she asked, her voice echoing in the empty corridor. "You think this is going to scare us?" The lead man growled, advancing toward her with menace in every step. That's when Marcus made the call. Within 90 seconds, 2 federal agents entered through the front entrance, badges displayed prominently, body armor visible beneath windbreakers. "FBI, hands where we can see them!" The intruders froze, caught in a trap of their own making. Camila stepped forward, her recording device still running. "You brought the fight to my door," she said with quiet intensity. "Now you're going to answer for it." The agents handcuffed all 3 men on site, charging them with breaking and entering, attempted theft, and interfering with a federal investigation. Marcus entered behind them, nodding once to Camila. "Worked like a charm." "Of course it did," she replied. "They think they're hunters. They never realize they've been prey since Tuesday." The footage was immediately packaged and transmitted to the Bureau's Office of Internal Affairs. But Camila wasn't content with internal justice. She uploaded a 30-second clip to her secure cloud and shared it with the same journalist who had broken the first story. No faces visible, just audio and shadowed figures. One voice clearly saying, "She's done. You hear me? Done." The clip exploded online, shifting the narrative once again. Now it wasn't just a viral video of a racist encounter. Now, it was organized retaliation against a federal officer criminal conspiracy that couldn't be dismissed as an isolated incident. The Department of Justice had no choice but to respond publicly. They announced a special investigation into the Benton County Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Calkins was placed on administrative leave pending review. Deputy Riker remained suspended without pay. Camila read the headlines from her cabin that night while Marcus poured her a cup of coffee, adding a splash of bourbon from a flask he kept for emergencies. "You just turned their ambush into a federal raid," he said with undisguised admiration. She allowed herself a small smile, the first genuine one in days. Not a strategic expression, not a calculated front, but a moment of authentic satisfaction. But she knew it wasn't over. The first cracks in a corrupt system were just the beginning. She sat back in a creaking wooden chair, glanced at her bandaged leg, and flexed her fingers thoughtfully. "Now," she said, "we go after the people who gave the orders." She opened her laptop again and created a new file titled simply, Chain of Command. Because if Calkins wasn't the top of this pyramid, someone was. And Camila was determined to climb that chain one link at a time until she found the hand that had lit the match. And when she did, she would burn it all down. 6. The Architect. The next few days unfolded like thunder moving through hills distant at first, but building steadily toward an inevitable crescendo. Camila worked tirelessly. Every hour, another piece added to her investigation, another name connected, another file unearthed. She methodically mapped the full hierarchy of the corrupt system she was fighting, and what she discovered sent ice through her veins. Calkins wasn't acting alone. She never had been. There was a name that appeared repeatedly in email threads, vendor contracts, and private donation records: State Senator Everett Grayson. On paper, Grayson was the quintessential law and order politician and retired police officer with 30 years on the force, a back-the-blue advocate known for his impassioned speeches about supporting law enforcement. But beneath that polished surface lurked something far more insidious. Grayson wasn't just supporting the system, he was bankrolling it. Financial records showed he had funneled campaign money into the sheriff's department through a web of PACs and private foundations. He had personally endorsed Calkins in each election and, according to a flagged security clearance form Marcus uncovered, had once lobbied for Riker to be fast-tracked through tactical training despite concerning psychological evaluations. But the most damning revelation came when Camila discovered Grayson's position on the State Oversight Committee, the very body responsible for reviewing misconduct cases against sheriffs and local law enforcement agencies. He had built the fence, then put himself in charge of watching the gate. "We've got our architect," Camila told Denise during a secure call. The prosecutor's voice was taut with controlled anger. "You ready to pull the roof down?" "More than ready." Together, they drafted a sealed affidavit requesting a federal audit of all law enforcement funding passed through Grayson's office over the previous 6 years. Then, methodically, Camila leaked key details to a trusted investigative journalist from St. Backseat, Louis, the king who verified every fact 3 times and never published without ironclad documentation. The article appeared 48 hours later, its headline devastatingly direct: "State Senator linked to sheriff abuse cover-up. FBI sources confirm investigation underway." The story blew the entire case wide open. News crews descended on Jefferson City like locusts. Senator Grayson canceled a scheduled town hall appearance. Sheriff Calkins' attorney stopped returning calls. Meanwhile, Camila's name had become synonymous with integrity in the face of corruption. Some political commentators labeled her reckless, others called her a hero, but no one called her invisible anymore. Still, the cost of challenging power was mounting. Her suspension remained in effect. The Bureau maintained an official no-comment stance even as the case dominated headlines. The institutional resistance was palpable, and factions within the agency clearly preferred this would fade quietly, like so many similar stories before it. But Camila Brooks had no intention of fading. She set the next phase of her plan in motion. With Marcus's help, she cultivated a secondary whistleblower, this time from inside Grayson's own operation. A legislative aide, nervous and skittish, but tired of enabling corruption, handed over something unexpected. A transcript of a private call where Grayson discussed tightening up leaks and taking care of the FBI problem before the next election cycle. That recording changed everything. Camila passed it directly to Denise, who moved with unprecedented speed. An official criminal referral went out within 12 hours. Now, it wasn't just an investigation. It was a pending indictment. Camila was sitting in the cabin when Marcus arrived with the printed affidavit in hand. He passed it to her like it was a sacred text. "This puts him on the hook for obstruction at minimum," he said. Camila nodded, reading each line carefully. Her body still ached, her leg remained stiff, but her mind was laser-focused. "We're not finished," she said. "Grayson may be the top of the chain, but he didn't build this alone." Marcus sat down across from her, leaning forward with unusual intensity. "There's something else." He slid a flash drive across the table. "An anonymous source dropped this in our secure inbox an hour ago." Camila plugged it in, and the screen illuminated with surveillance footage, grainy and low light, but clear enough. It showed a backroom meeting in what appeared to be a warehouse or storage facility. In frame were Riker, Calkins, and Grayson uniforms. No pretense, just 3 people discussing strategy. They weren't talking about public safety or community relations. They were talking about optics, about shutting her down before it spreads, about making examples of whistleblowers. Camila stared at the screen, transfixed. There it was, the conspiracy laid bare. Real, raw, undeniable evidence that they had planned everything. The intimidation, the sabotage, even the media spin that followed. It wasn't about a single kick anymore. It was about how far power would go to protect itself. She stood up slowly and walked to the window. The sun was setting, bleeding orange across the treetops. She knew that by tomorrow, everything would break open completely. Turning back to Marcus, she made her decision. Leak it all. He raised an eyebrow. Even the audio, all of it. That night, the video hit every major platform simultaneously. Camila didn't narrate this one. She didn't need to. The footage spoke volumes on its own. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The governor called for emergency hearings. The FBI, under immense pressure from every direction, lifted Camila's suspension the following morning. The Bureau's director issued a statement commending those who refused to be silenced in the face of systemic failure. Camila barely registered any of it. She was already preparing for what came next, packing her go-bag because the arrest warrants were being signed and executed. Calkins, Riker, Grayson, anyone who had touched the machinery of corruption. By the time she zipped her duffel and slung it over her shoulder, helicopters thudded overhead and media vans clogged the rural roads leading toward Benton County. Marcus looked at her with a mixture of awe and concern. "You lit the match," he said. Camila pulled on her jacket and checked her phone one last time. No, she corrected him. I was the match. And with that, she stepped into the gathering darkness, ready for the final confrontation. Z. The Reckoning. The sun had barely cleared the tree line when the first warrant was executed. Sheriff Linda Calkins was taken into custody at 6-7 a.m., still wearing her bathrobe when federal agents knocked on her front door. There were no sirens, no dramatic showdown, just the quiet, methodical process of justice finally catching up. Her hands were cuffed in front of her husband of 23 years. Neighbors watched from porches and driveways, silent witnesses to the fall of a woman who had wielded unchecked power over their community for nearly a decade. There was no shouting, no denial, just the stunned expression of someone who truly believed they were untouchable, suddenly realizing they weren't. An hour later, Deputy Kyle Riker was arrested in his driveway as he prepared to go fishing on his day off from a job he was already suspended from. Unlike his boss, he didn't go quietly. He postured and protested, claiming political persecution and threatening lawsuits. The federal agents didn't engage. They didn't need to. They had the footage, the documentation, the pattern of behavior, and most damning of all, the evidence of coordination. By mid-morning, federal marshals had sealed Senator Grayson's office. The man himself wasn't there. He'd fled hours earlier, a plane ticket hastily booked for a fishing retreat in Montana. But it didn't matter. Authorities located him 2 states away by sunset, alone in a rented cabin, nursing a bottle of expensive scotch. When they handcuffed him, he didn't resist. The fight had already drained from his eyes, replaced by the hollow recognition that his carefully constructed world was collapsing. Back in Missouri, Benton County Courthouse had become the epicenter of a media storm. Protesters lined the streets holding signs demanding justice. Journalists crowded behind barricades, jostling for the best camera angles. Every news channel in the country had a live feed pointed at the courthouse steps. And in the midst of this chaos, Camila Brooks emerged from the building's main entrance, her FBI badge restored to its place on her belt, her stride purposeful despite the lingering stiffness in her leg. She didn't speak to the cameras, not yet. She simply raised one hand in a small, almost solemn gesture of acknowledgement. The crowd erupted anyway, not just for her, but for what she represented. The validation that sometimes, against all odds, justice could actually prevail. Inside the courthouse, indictments were being processed one after another. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, destruction of evidence, violation of civil rights under color of law, witness intimidation. As lower-level deputies began cooperating to save themselves, the list of implicated officials grew. The system hadn't just cracked. It was collapsing entirely. Camila returned to the field office that afternoon to debrief with Marcus and Denise. The mood wasn't celebratory, it was focused, vigilant, because they all understood what those watching from the outside couldn't fully grasp. This wasn't the end. This was the part where power fought most desperately to survive, and desperation made even cornered bureaucrats dangerous. The FBI had issued protection orders for both Camila and Marcus, but she declined a security detail not from pride, but principle. She'd spent too long operating in the shadows of bureaucratic caution. She wasn't hiding anymore. That evening, she drove herself home for the first time in over a week. The familiar sight of her own driveway, her own porch light, the giant oak tree in her front yard swaying gently in the evening breeze, all of it felt different somehow. More substantial. More real. She stepped inside, dropped her keys on the entryway table, and stood motionless in the silence for a long moment. No alerts chiming, no phones ringing. Just quiet the mind that creates space for reflection. She sat down at her kitchen table, poured a glass of water, and turned on the television. Senator Grayson's mugshot filled the screen, his normally confident expression replaced by shell-shocked resignation. Beside the image, a news ticker scrolled. FBI official identified as catalyst in corruption crackdown. Her name, her rank, her voice from one of the leaked recordings played in a continuous loop. She lowered the volume. Everything was happening with dizzying speed now, events unfolding faster than even she had anticipated. That same night, someone firebombed the front lobby of the Benton County Sheriff's Office. No one was injured, but the message was clear. Not all the rot had been excised, and not everyone was ready to surrender quietly. Marcus called her 5 minutes after the story broke. "We've got a problem." She didn't ask what. She simply said, "Where?" He gave her coordinates for an old warehouse listed under a shell company tied to one of Grayson's donors, the same investor who'd secured the county jail food service contract. Surveillance showed unusual activity. Vehicles coming and going at odd hours, armed men patrolling the perimeter, lights burning through the night, a fallback position, a last stand. Camila didn't hesitate. She authorized an immediate warrant, and the raid was executed just past midnight. Inside the warehouse, agents discovered computer servers, unregistered weapons, burner phones, and most chillingly, folders containing surveillance photographs of Camila, Marcus, and Dennis images taken in public spaces, at cafes, outside courthouses. Notes had been scribbled in margins detailing movements, patterns, vulnerabilities. This wasn't just corruption, it was an organized operation, and Camila had become its primary target. By morning, headlines blared. FBI whistleblower targeted in retaliation plot. The public backlash was immediate and fierce. The governor requested federal oversight of Benton County's entire justice system. Department of Justice teams were dispatched from Washington. Camila was asked to testify before a Senate Judiciary panel. She accepted without hesitation. Standing before the chamber in a crisp navy suit, her injured legs still subtly bandaged beneath the fabric, she spoke with the clarity that only first-hand experience could provide. What we uncovered in Benton County wasn't an anomaly. It wasn't one man, one sheriff, or even one senator. It was a deliberately designed system of protection for those who abused power and punishment for those who questioned it. Her words made national news, but they also painted an even larger target on her back. That night, she found a note taped to her apartment door, 3 words scrawled in thick marker. "We see you." She removed it calmly, folded it, and tucked it into her pocket like it was nothing more than a grocery receipt. Because compared to what she'd already faced, 3 anonymous words were merely dust. Still, she harbored no illusions about the danger. Systems exposed to light don't simply disappear. They try to rebuild themselves, to replace visible faces while maintaining invisible structures. That's the nature of institutional corruption. It clings. It adapts. It waits. But Camila wasn't going anywhere. She returned to her desk the next morning and continued her work. No fanfare, no press releases. Just another cup of coffee, another stack of reports, another lead to pursue. Because somewhere out there, another version of Riker was patrolling the streets. Another Calkins was signing off on cover-ups. Another Grayson was pulling strings behind closed doors. She would find them all eventually. And next time, she wouldn't wait to be attacked. She would strike first. Because Camila Brooks had become more than just a dedicated federal agent, more than just the woman in that viral video. She was the embodiment of accountability itself. And she was just getting started. Number 8. The final hand. Camila knew the fight would never truly end. You don't expose a system that is entrenched, that powerful, and expect it to surrender without a final, desperate gambit. But even she didn't anticipate what came next. It happened on a Wednesday morning, deceptively ordinary, remarkably quiet. She was leaving a strategy meeting with DOJ analysts, her badge once again secured at her hip, when her phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Marcus. One word, move. She didn't question it. Years of field experience took over instantly. She crossed the street at an angle, ducked behind a delivery truck, and was gone before the black SUV rounded the corner, windows tinted beyond legal limits, license plates obscured by mud. The vehicle idled outside the federal building for precisely 37 seconds, then accelerated away. They were still tracking her, still hunting, and not just through physical surveillance. 2 days later, a federal cybersecurity specialist from Quantico requested an urgent meeting. The young agent arrived clutching a folder like it contained radioactive material. "We found something embedded in your secure access badge, Chief Brooks," he explained, voice lowered despite being in a swept room. A low-frequency beacon, military grade, could have been triggered remotely from up to a mile away. Camila stared at him, processing the implications. "I've been tagged." He nodded, unable to fully meet her gaze. "By whom?" He didn't have an answer, or rather, he had one he wasn't authorized to voice aloud. She dismissed him, thanked him for his diligence, then closed and locked her office door. Standing in the center of the room, she allowed herself 60 seconds of perfect stillness, thinking, analyzing, connecting final dots. They hadn't stopped pursuing her. They'd simply gone quieter, more sophisticated. Camila called Marcus on a secure line. "We go now, not to the cabin." "Where?" "Gulf Shores." The last name on the file. The file in question was one she hadn't shared with anyone, not even Denise. It had appeared weeks earlier, slipped under her motel room door in an unmarked envelope. Inside were surveillance photos of Senator Grayson meeting with a man identified only in handwritten notes as Vincent Hargrove. Subsequent research had revealed Hargrove to be a private security magnate with nebulous connections to both government contracting and corporate intelligence. Former military, now operating in the shadows with no official title, but considerable unofficial influence. And one more critical detail: he had ties to her original suspension. According to a confidential source, Hargrove had recommended the DOJ cool the situation after the protests began. She understood now. The final hand. The power behind the curtain. They drove through the night. No headlights for the last 20 miles. No conversation, just the hum of tires on asphalt and the weight of what lay ahead. Hargrove's beach house stood in isolation on a private stretch of coastline, modern glass and steel perched on stilts above the sand. Too calculated to be old money, too austere to be new wealth. The kind of home designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Camila approached alone. Marcus remained in position half a mile back, watching through a thermal scope, ready to call in a tactical team if she didn't check in every 15 minutes. She rang the bell once. Vincent Hargrove answered as if he'd been expecting her. Mid-60s, silver-haired with a precisely trimmed beard and eyes that evaluated rather than saw. He wore casual clothes like ill-fitting costume linen pants and an open-collared shirt that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "You came," he said, "not a question, but an observation." "You had me tagged," she replied evenly. He smiled at the careful expression of someone who rarely needed to demonstrate actual emotion. "A temporary precaution. You were attracting attention. You tried to silence me. I tried to protect an ecosystem from devouring itself." He stepped aside, inviting her in with a gesture that suggested refusal wasn't an option. Camila entered the house, immediately noting exits, potential weapons, camera positions. The space smelled of leather and sandalwood, expensive and impersonal. Hargrove poured himself a drink, but didn't offer her Onier's small power play she recognized and dismissed. "You think you've won, Agent Brooks," he said, swirling amber liquid in a crystal tumbler. "But you don't understand the game. You made noise. You made enemies. And you exposed a system that was built to withstand far more than just a woman with a microphone." She didn't react to the dismissive characterization. "I didn't come to argue." "Then why are you here?" Camila extracted a flash drive from her pocket and placed it deliberately on the glass coffee table between them. "The rest of it," she said simply, "every file, every conversation. Your contractors, your off-books surveillance. If anything happens to me or my team, if I disappear, if I'm discredited, if I'm struck by a mysterious illness, this goes public, internationally, immediately." Hargrove's practiced smile faded. For the first time, genuine emotion flickered across his features. Not fear, precisely, but the recognition of genuine threat. You'd burn it all down without a second thought. In a heartbeat, she confirmed. He studied her for a long moment, the silence stretching between them like a drawn wire. Then, he nodded once, a barely perceptible acknowledgement. "This was never about you, Camila," he said quietly. "It was about the system holding." She turned to leave, pausing at the door to deliver her final assessment. "That's the difference between us, Hargrove. You serve a system, I serve the truth." Outside, the Gulf wind hit her face like a physical force. The sea roared below, dark and restless. But she didn't linger. She walked back to the waiting vehicle, climbed in and said only 2 words to Marcus: "It's done." He didn't ask what that meant. He simply started the engine and drove away from the isolated house and the man inside who had pulled so many strings for so long. The next morning, Camila submitted her resignation from the FBI not in defeat, not in retreat, but as a strategic repositioning. She needed to speak without constraints, without institutional caution tempering her words. Her final report, published through an independent watchdog organization, sent shockwaves through law enforcement communities nationwide. It documented the entire case from beginning to end, from the initial assault at the gas station to the arrests, from the surveillance to the sabotage, from local corruption to federal complicity. She didn't name Hargrove explicitly, but she didn't need to. Those who understood the relevant codes could read between every line. Public hearings followed. Legislation was introduced. Some changes were cosmetic, others substantive. But most importantly, people were watching now, paying attention to patterns they'd previously dismissed as isolated incidents. Camila spoke at universities, town halls, veteran gatherings, and civil rights rallies. And everywhere she delivered the same essential message: justice doesn't begin with punishment, it begins with truth. The truth was uncomfortable, but it was finally in the light. 1 year later, she returned to the gas station where it all began. The pumps had been replaced, the gravel lot repaved. No visible evidence remained of what had transpired there, except for one addition: a small bronze plaque installed at the edge of the property. It read simply, "Here stood a woman. She didn't fall." Camila stood before it for a long time. No press, no cameras, just her, and the embodied memory of a boot and all that followed. Then she turned, climbed back into her car, and drove away not to escape, but toward whatever injustice required confrontation next. Because that's the nature of those who fight for accountability. They don't stop. They move forward, regardless of cost. And Camila Brooks was already moving toward the next battlefield. Epilogue: the ongoing fight. Here's something worth remembering, not just from Camila's story, but for all of us watching from the sidelines. Justice isn't an event, it's a continuous process. And sometimes it begins in the most ordinary places. A gas station, a dusty road, a woman who refuses to stay down when knocked to the ground. What Camila demonstrated wasn't extraordinary in its complexity, but in its rarity. The courage to stand alone when institutional forces align against you. The determination to pursue truth when lies would be more convenient. The willingness to sacrifice position for principle. You don't need to raise your voice to raise awareness. You don't need a badge to demand accountability. You just need to stand firmly in truth, even when power tells you to stay in your lane, even when systems try to silence you, even when the cost seems too high to bear. Because integrity doesn't retire, courage doesn't age, and truth has no expiration date. So wherever you find yourself, whatever chapter of life you're navigating, remember this: you're never too small to make a difference, never too isolated to create change. And it's never too late to become the catalyst that transforms a moment of injustice into a movement for reform. Camila didn't fall, and neither should you.